Hello and welcome to another episode of the FinRestra podcast. I am Jan Muschot. My guest today is Rik Coeckelbergs. Rik is the founder of the banking scene. Hi Rik, welcome to the show.
Hello Jan, great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Can you tell us what the banking scene is or what you do at the banking scene?
The banking scene is a network organization for bankers and for the entire industry, in fact, where we try to find ways to improve the banking experience for human and society and try to figure out how the future of the industry may look like in the future. The way we do that is by organizing both digital and physical meetups. And most people probably know the banking scene through our flagship conference in Brussels, which attracted last time back in 2019, about 360 people. Next year, we hope to be back with minimum 400 people in Brussels. The idea of the banking scene dates back a very long time ago. I started personally as a banker at KBC. That was at a moment or for a job that wasn't 100% aligned with what I was actually looking for. But it was a very interesting starting position for me. And because I want to move ahead to the innovation department, that was back in payments, I set up a LinkedIn group, Innovation in Payments. And at the time, that was 2009, that was a very valuable community for me, as many international experts joined the group, and it was very interactive community where I could ask any possible stupid or smart question on payments and dynamics of payments. I had all these experts that were willing to show how much they knew about the industry. So they were all eager to answer my sometimes stupid questions. And that's how the innovation in payments grew as a community. Certain moment in time, LinkedIn started killing some of that value. And that's when I decided to set up something in parallel, because that helped me understand the importance of community, the importance of sharing ideas, and the importance of bringing people together and help them grow their network. Yeah. Of course, that was all payments related, very international. And I thought that's going to be rather impossible to do something with that in Brussels. So I decided to, content-wise, broaden my scope, but geographically limit it at first to Benelux. And that's where the banking scene came from. First, to have at least one day a year where banks could still be proud being a banker in times when fintechs were claiming the end of bankers is near. And on the other hand, to have this platform for conversation.
Yeah, so you started on LinkedIn, but it grew into something physical, and it not just limited to Belgium, but as you already explained, first it was Benelux, but now it's grown much bigger, because if we see your guests, you have people from the UK, from all over Europe, even farther. So yeah, you really grew it very, very large. One of the reasons why I invited you was because I should say we are recording this the 18th of October, and in 10 days time, on the 28th, the banking scene has a physical meetup at an art exhibition in Brussels, and you posted a very thoughtful article about the art of banking. Can you explain what you meant with the art of banking and what the parallels are between banking and artists?
Of course, I can't share everything because we have those executives there sharing how they feel about the art of banking. The fun thing about talking about art is that it's something very personal. Ask 10 people what art is, and you'll probably get 10 different definitions. I did a little bit of research myself, and I found on, I think it was Wikipedia, the definition of art being the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. Now, in many discussions I had over the past 1.5 years, there's a period where we started having virtual weekly roundtable sessions. And we invited every time people from the industry, and quite a few sessions were on banking for good. Banking for good for me is linked to this art of banking in a way that I ask people, and mostly executives, how they have an impact on people and society and how they want to do better in the future. And that means that you are building something to be appreciated. And that is, I think, for the industry, very often a challenge. You and I, we love to speak about banking, but ask anyone on the street and he probably doesn't like to speak about banking.
Yeah, it's not a popular topic, or most people will think it's boring and it's just a bank.
Right.
And maybe also don't really know exactly what banks do. It's just something, they have an app to do their payments and they pay off their mortgage. But for most people, they're not very familiar with the industry.
Exactly. So when I thought about the art of banking, that's when I realized that every day you and I and everyone working in the industry redefine banking in favor of customers and society. At least that's what we're supposed to be doing. And that means that we are constantly creating and producing works to be appreciated. And that's where I make the link with the art of banking. So on October 28th, we invited a couple of executives that changed their strategy or pivoted their strategy and really changed how they look at the art of banking. That was the going in position of the banking scene art nights. And on top of that, we will also add a nocturne on David Hockney to really bring the level of inspiration at our activities to another level.
Yeah. Of course, you cannot speak for the people that will be at the art night. But before, like you already said, you have this weekly meetup. Now during the pandemic, it has been mostly online, of course. But you've talked to hundreds of people, of persons who work in the financial industry. If you had to make like abstraction, what do they think is the most valuable contribution that they make to society, or the most valuable part of their job?
Well, before I'm going to answer that question, these meetups that you and I are now talking about is something that we actually started during the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah.
So we started digitally. Before that, we had 2 conferences a year. Now we're having weekly roundtables on a virtual basis, very low entry, easy to participate, and easy for special guests to join the party as there is no traffic or whatsoever involved. And there, indeed, I interviewed many people, many executives as well. And when we talk about banking for good, you always hear this message that banks are there to improve lives of people and to have an impact on society. And I think that's also what makes me so passionate about the industry. In a way, you could say that banks are the veins in society that keep the blood running. You are a banking expert as well, and you know all about the importance of financial intermediation, how banks are today creating value both for people with excessive money and people and organizations, of course, that require money, and they make a balance out of that without too much risk for either of the parties. And that is for me very intriguing, because in a way bankers do have a lot of power, and that also means that there is a reasonable chance for abuse, as we saw in the financial crisis, for example. But there's also a lot of opportunity to do good. And that's what I really try to get out of there, because today you see increasingly more pressure, both from society, from the regulators. And luckily, increasingly more from within the industry as well. And that is, I think, a very good sign, and hopefully a path towards a better, brighter, and more transparent future. Because banks are also trust providers for their customers. If you look at the long-term vision for the industry, the idea of trust providers instead of cash providers may be a lot more relevant when we talk about a future within in 10, 15 years. It will be completely different. I'll probably discuss about some of the topics linked to that later on in this discussion. But the idea of being a trust provider, being the person that can, as Leen van den Niste, the chairwoman of VDK Bank, said last week, we are there to realize people's dreams. That's a very powerful message. And that's a message that every self-respecting bank with a full spectrum of banking services should be doing.
That's a very powerful image of the industry, because like if you think about some visions that people had that big tech like Facebook would also become a bank, I am not sure that many people trust Facebook with their money, maybe just to upload pictures and to discuss with their friends. But do you really want to put all of your savings into Facebook Bank? While we see that most people still, well, maybe they wouldn't say they like their bank, but at least they trust their bank to keep all of their financial their savings and their investments at their local bank, and often the bank that they already had when they were a child. So that's something very deep, the trusts of that people have in banks, that maybe we take for granted. And it's only, like you already said, like during the financial crisis, when people suddenly start questioning whether the banks really can be trusted, then we have a really big problem, not just financially, but really in society as a whole.
Absolutely. And trust is going down. Banks are no longer the trusted brands, but they are the first point of contact still when it comes to financial needs of people, luckily. And banks really need to ensure that they remain that trusted partner in the future. Now, I don't think big tech will be a huge threat. Of course, there's always a threat, but I see them more as enablers, as collaborators and partners of banks, rather than providing banking services themselves.
Yeah. So, although we already have like Apple Pay and Google Pay, you think it will stay only as a payment service provider? They won't do like lending or other services that banks provide now?
They probably will, but would there be a Google Pay and an Apple Pay if there wasn't a current account or a card from a bank linked to it?
Yeah, probably not. It's
exactly.
like something on top.
Every partnership of Apple and Google today is based on a link, a tie with a financial institution.
Yeah.
So right now, I mean, the situation of today proves that they are not really that interested in providing all the financial services themselves. Otherwise, they would have already a long time. What they are interested in is the touch points with customers, the data points with customers, and a better understanding of customers' behavior, not so much in financial services.
And if we were talking about trust earlier, you probably also do not want your bank to know everything about you. And from the point of view of the banks, they need to know your customer and AML, while probably the big tech companies wouldn't want that responsibility. We already saw that Facebook is getting a lot of complaints about how it behaves, and it would radically change its business model and how it behaves if they have to be as yeah, if they need to know that much about their customers like banks do.
It's a different business model, and different business models require different kinds of identification. I could even imagine, suppose Facebook would go into financial services requiring the same level of KYC, that they have different kind of customers, where customers with financial services would require a different kind of KYC. But that's another discussion, of course.
Yeah. In last episode, I talked to Koen Vingerhoets about blockchain technology, and we also discussed the fact that like a couple of years ago, people were really thinking that Bitcoin and related currencies would somehow replace the banking system. But what we are seeing now is actually the opposite. Like some banks are looking into providing custody for cryptocurrencies, and it seems that the idea of be your own bank and banks are dinosaurs, this idea has been proven wrong in practice. What's your opinion on that, on the relation between the crypto ecosystem, maybe not just related to currencies, but also the other aspects like NFTs and ICOs, and the existing banking system?
Tough question. And probably Koen is a much better place to answer those questions, as I'm not a crypto expert, because I am rather reluctant or rather hesitant towards the technology. On the other hand, I did have a couple of discussions and roundtables on the topic, and will soon have another one with the founder of Fenley on the future of money and his perspective on that. So you're maybe a bit early with this podcast. On the other hand, I do think we need to make a clear distinction between blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, ICOs. And what banks are today mostly interested in is the first level, because there is more consensus about it. It's sometimes better regulated, and you can build valuable blockchain solutions within let's say a well-controlled environment. Cryptocurrencies these days are often in the widely available and available everywhere, with a lot of dodgy afterthoughts here and there. It's not that well regulated. Once it's better regulated, there may be a future for banks absolutely also in that domain. The fact that banks like KBC are currently developing their own crypto shows that as well. So you have the open cryptocurrencies available for everyone. On the other hand, you have the more closed loop cryptos like the one of KBC. Different use cases, different opportunities again. ICOs, that's yet another example. And I haven't heard a lot from ICOs lately. It seems like the hype is a bit over. To me, it sounded more like crowdfunding in another shape. And again, not that well regulated, which is why banks were not that interested in it. Banks are trust providers, and that means that they need to take into account regulation. And that's what currently often missing in this kind of examples.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave the blockchain and crypto space behind us. I want to return to something that you said earlier about banking for good. You started the banking scene, so you're an entrepreneur. But if we look at what regulators expect banks to do for good, like I wrote down some topics like banks should be green. Some regulators think there are too many banks in Europe. Banks should be more international, or they should do more consolidation. They have to do a lot of reporting, of course. They have to do the know your customer, everything else. As an entrepreneur, can banks still be entrepreneurial, or have they almost become parts of the state where there are so many rules that it's hard to differentiate yourself as a bank?
Question is, do banks need to be entrepreneurs? To me, banks are risk managers, and they can do that in different forms, but essentially they are risk managers. They are measuring the risk of their customers to look at how they can best provide value according to their risk profile. So in everything they do, they take risk, they measure risk, and they act to it. And of course, entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, they develop new ideas, they use their own money or money from investors that know what risks they're taking. But banks very often use the money from anyone on the street, and those people are not interested in what the bank is investing in as long as the money is safe. And that means that they need to be very prudent on what they spend their money on. So I really like the idea that I heard a very long time ago when the whole hype of fintech started. Banks, do they need to be innovators? I'm not that sure. And of course, they need to be agile and they need to be able to act maybe sometimes faster on new trends than what they're doing today. And I think they took a lot of steps compared to a couple of years ago, major steps even in being more agile and being able to anticipate faster on changes in society and in technology. But do they need to be entrepreneurs? I'm not so sure. Do they?
Yeah, I think when people think about entrepreneurs, it's often that they think about like Steve Jobs or people or like Elon Musk who create new technology. Maybe from that perspective, banks in general could do more. Of course, we've seen the shift like first to online banking and then to app-based banking. There
I
are,
think
yeah,
the idea of the examples of Tesla and Apple are pretty good ideas, are pretty good examples when you make the link to banking. And fintechs won't like what I'm going to share now, but electric cars are not invented by Tesla. Mobile phones are not invented by Tesla. Someone else made it before. They took the they looked at the technology, they revamped it in something better. That's what banks are doing today as well. And through partnerships, they find partners to revamp their current business and doing it better in the future. So in a way, you could say that they're innovators, maybe not with such a big names as Tesla, as Apple and the iPhone, but you could draw the parallel to some extent, in my opinion.
yeah. And you think they should partner up with these fintech companies? Because who or can we be sure that banks won't be the Nokia that will be replaced by some fintech Apple? Like that the existing that there are better fintech companies who can provide this trust and these technological solutions in a better way than the existing banks?
Well, that was the buzz when I started the banking scene, and I didn't believe that the era of banking would be over. And luckily today I see that confirmed. And when you talk about the conversations around fintech, those pivot predominantly around the fact that fintechs are entrepreneurial companies that are very strong on very specific cases, very specific functionalities, very specific solutions in financial services. There are only a very few fintech companies that can provide all the solutions that a bank does today. So when you ask me, will fintechs take over? I'm not so sure. There may be a few fintechs that build such a wide range of services that they are at a level that they can compete with banks. And you have new banks, as you always had new banks in the past. Some banks come, other banks go. So definitely there will be a change in the market, but that doesn't mean that the industry of banking will be taken over by something else.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced about that.
Yeah, because like if we look in Europe, you have some neo banks like N26 and Revolut, but I think their market share is still pretty limited. Although they're like born digital and they don't have any physical branches. But I think except for a couple of specific, like probably for very international people who need multiple currencies and accounts, for them, those banks can be interesting. But I don't think many people have them as their first bank yet, where they get their monthly paycheck into these accounts. So it seems that definitely for now, the traditional banking system is still very much the dominant player.
I agree with you. And youth may be another segment that knows these brands better. But I think in the beginning of this year, there was a research done for the Belgian market on the brand awareness of banks. And Ion Bank, which is a Belgian digital only bank, they were number one in terms of digital banks that were top of mind. And they got 5% of the Belgian population that knew Ion Bank. 5%.
Yeah.
All the other examples that you gave come after Ion Bank. So to me, that shows that, first of all, there may be some ignorance in terms of banking in Belgium, but also that digital banks have tough time in converting prospects into customers. And that is different in some other countries. I'm well aware of that. But I think in Belgium, we are spoiled. The fact that few of the major banks are positioned number 1 and 2 as the best banking apps worldwide by a recent survey. The fact that you have banks in Belgium that don't charge for banking services, that's pretty unique. And that's a real challenge for new players that need to make money sooner or later with financial services.
Yeah, of course, you're right to say that here we're both Belgians, so that we're quite spoiled, because I'm always amazed when I talk to people, even from France, for example.
France is a very expensive country.
Yeah, if you tell them that we've been able to do instant payments for quite some time and it's free, people are like shocked, like what, we have to pay for that service, while here everybody takes it for granted that we can do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very, very fascinating. Maybe just to challenge you on one point, because you, like you said, you have this background in payments. Haven't banks missed like some evolutions in payments? Like if you look in the Netherlands, you have this company called Adyen, who processes payments, and I think their market cap is higher than ING and ABN AMRO combined. So although they are still, well, they're no longer a startup, they're a scale up, but they've managed to provide the service to shops. I think they process all different kinds of cards in many different countries. Isn't that something that the traditional banks have maybe missed this evolution?
I don't know. It's one of the regular questions and one of the regular success stories of fintech, of course, and I understand that very well, because Adyen is a hugely successful story in payments. Just like Molly, by the way, another Dutch example. But if you look in the past, I mean, the biggest payment provider in Belgium is not a bank, that's Worldline. So payments is often linked and tied to banking services, but it's not a core product of banks today. So, and in your question or your comparison in terms of market cap, is the purpose of a bank to have the highest possible market cap, or should they serve their customers and society for the better sake?
Yeah.
So again, I mean, yes, Adyen and Molly, they're hugely successful in what they are doing. They are doing a certain niche of financial services, and they're doing that very well. And yeah, it's a good example of highly successful fintech. It's not a bank, not yet. Never say never, of course. We have other examples like Square that are continuously broadening their services, and Adyen may consider a similar strategy in not only providing payment services, but certain moment also providing credits to their customers, their business customers, then maybe a card, etc. Will they ever move into full-fledged banking services? Probably not, because it may be more convenient for them to set up partnerships with banks at the back and to provide services rather than producing them, because that would make the balance sheet completely different, and that may no longer be aligned with the current shareholders.
Yeah.
The whole shareholder discussion is also one of the reasons why I don't think that Google will soon become a bank. The capital requirements of being a bank is completely different than the capital requirements of being a technology company. Yeah. As a result, also the return on equity, of course.
Yeah, definitely. Like, banks have this important role as risk managers, as you already said, but maybe from a point of view of the shareholders, they should also be aware that this isn't an industry that's going back to pre-financial crisis where book values, or when market values were 3 times the book value, and you could like get a return on equity of 15% or even higher. Maybe people should be realistic in their expectations. Maybe banks will be more like, or continue to be more like, utilities that have a steady return. Of course, now with the pandemic, it was very unusual, but usually banks pay relatively high dividends and are also quite predictable.
I was just, as you were explaining, having a look at the return on equity, because you speak about high return on equities being 16, 17% of a bank pre-crisis. Adyen, which is, according to me, more a technology company or a financial service company, when I look here, it was 30% return on equity. So it's a completely different balance that they have to manage, and that attracts different investors.
Yeah, it's a very different industry, although it's both financial services. It's quite different in the products and also actually in the clients, because Adyen is really for professional parties, while banks serve the whole of society, from retail clients to big corporates and everybody in between.
Don't forget that Adyen makes business, most of its revenues, on fees, and banks on the margins.
Yeah.
So the business model is also completely different.
Yeah. And that's maybe also a good topic, and something that surprised me, because one of the things that I follow a lot is the European Central Bank, and then you have all these macroeconomic discussions about low interest rates. But what I noticed in talks of the banking scene is that bankers don't really complain about the low interest rates. I mean, the people who really talk to their clients every day, they have like other concerns. They really want to serve best the client, and the low interest rates, it's something they cannot change it. And that's very fascinating, because there's the difference between this like macroeconomic discussion and the valuation of banks, and then the people who are really like you should say, like the boots on the ground, who really interact with their customers. They have very different concerns. Like also with Leen van den Neste, I remember she said like one of her main concerns was the high level of taxes, not taxes on the profits, but before that they have to contribute like to this banking fund that protects the savings of the customers. And I think she said it was more than 10 percentage points of their income goes to all this kind of overhead. So that's really fascinating to hear how a chairwoman, as she is judging the market environment.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's about the bank's profitability. If we look at it, like, yeah, we are both very interested in banks, but for people who, like students who are thinking about a career, do you think that banking is still attractive? Or do you think that, like, especially technical people or people who are good at sales, they'll be more attracted to tech companies or startups, or yeah, if you're good at sales, maybe you should go into real estate, and then because there, I guess the margins are higher? Or do you think that there's still a good career in banking for young people also?
I'm convinced there's still a lot of opportunity for banks. Now, I'm also realistic, and we heard Leen van der Neste saying last week as well, they have quite a tough time finding financial advisors because banks are closing down their branches, and people see that as that's for them the front of a bank, and they see that go down. As a result, I believe that the overall banking industry is going down. According to me, there's still a lot of opportunity in banking. If you look at financial services, they are tech companies in a way, and they have been for so long. The invention of the card, the invention of the ATM, the first big users of mainframe, one of the first users of the internet, etc. Banks were always involved in that. And today, of course, if you're a tech person, it could be more appealing of looking for other ventures. But I think the bank has a lot of opportunity. And if I look back at the many conversations I had, one of the main differentiating elements compared to many other industries or many other job opportunities is all the training possibilities. The fact that as a bank, as I said, it's the veins in society that keeps the blood running. There's so much tied to banking. There are so many opportunities, so many different ways of contributing to that industry that, yeah, I think the job opportunities are endless. But of course, right now, banking is often not top of mind for young graduates, unfortunately. But real estate has always been there, and of course you have a decent commission with real estate. But if you're looking for something more purposeful, then maybe banking could be an opportunity. I'm not so convinced of real estate, except for the high bonuses that you may be earning. But I would personally never be satisfied with a job in real estate, because the only thing that you get there is, except that maybe you are giving or helping people finding a house, but the biggest incentive is the financial incentive. I think with banking, you can have a much bigger impact on human and society.
Yeah.
But of course, that's me being passionate about the industry, working in it and with it for a long time. So maybe you're asking the wrong person.
So, but that's very interesting that if you sell a house, it's just a transaction, while when you're a banker, you really have this long-term relationship with your client. Like I liked also when I used to work in a bank, people were very passionate about the difference between customers and clients. And they also stressed like clients client sounds a bit old-fashioned. Like if you translate it into Dutch, like it's cliënt and not klant. But klant is more like customer, is more like, yeah, you go to a bakery or to a supermarket and the next day you go somewhere else. While if you have a client, you have this long-term relationship with this person and you trust them like throughout their entire life.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, from the moment they are born throughout their life, like they move out or they buy a house or they get married and they have kids of their own, that they have this very strong bond.
Yep.
And that's also, it comes back to the earlier discussion about trust.
Realizing someone's dreams as well.
Yeah. So that's very, very fascinating that, like, as a banker, it's almost, well, I wouldn't say it's a vocation, but it's definitely not like many other jobs that where you just do this job and then you move on to something else. Yeah, that's very fascinating. And maybe the other point about why it's still an attractive employer for young people. You mentioned already that banks used to be pioneers, like with the ATM and also with the use of internet technology, the mainframes from I guess the 1960s. Something I will try to do another episode on is also the use of artificial intelligence. Like, many people also don't know that if they think about AI, it's always about like self-driving cars or robots. But the banks also use AI to improve their processes, both for risk and also like to offer better investments to their clients. I don't know if you've have some
It
stories
goes
about
way,
that.
way beyond. We had many discussions about that, and that was more on the whole idea of RPA, robotic process automation, where robots start taking over the mundane jobs or start creating, adding value to the financial advisor, etc. So you can add artificially intelligent systems almost everywhere in the bank. And as you said, I think it deserves a complete episode to discuss that further, because artificial intelligence is often a buzzword used for no matter what, but I think it deserves a lot more nuance to have a decent discussion about what the opportunities are. And only a very minor element of that is to help a computer investing your money.
Yeah. But and to come back to the topic of the art of banking, like, there also used to be this concern that robot advisors would replace humans. But I guess it's gonna be the same story. Like, in theory, yeah, so some algorithms can also create art, but probably the best result will be the combination of the human element enhanced with this technology.
No, absolutely. And in all honesty, 15 years ago, I had the naive point of view that by 2020, probably the only person still working would be the CEO, because all the rest would be automated. Today, the labor market has never been so narrow as it is today. So clearly shows that my vision 15 to 20 years ago is definitely not correct. And people will always look for new opportunities, and by automating the jobs that are not interesting, they can look for more value creating opportunities. So yeah, will they automate everything? Definitely not. And the moment that they are automating some of those aspects, yeah, those people that are at that moment maybe not longer required in the process that they have been working on for years can be used somewhere else.
Yeah, you said, like, if you look back, you cannot exactly predict the future, but nobody can. But if you were to speculate, or like some trends that you already see happening now but that the general public is not aware of, what do you think could happen within 5 or 10 years? Like, maybe just start with the obvious, like the existing banking system that we have now. Do you think that most of them will survive the technological evolution? I guess yes, based on what you said previously.
Chris Skinner asked me to write my vision on banking in 2040, last year. And that will be added in his new book that comes out next year. So it gave me quite a big challenge. And part of that was also reflecting on the near future. And in that respect, I do believe that the banking scene the banking industry today is under pressure, and they will continue to do so for quite some time. Banks need to reinvent themselves, or maybe not all, but at least some. We will have a consolidation, but we'll also have new banks coming with new propositions. And I do believe in a future where you have a few big corporate banks that not only serve their business and private customers, but also serve third-party banks that are building on very unique value propositions and become more of a sales and a marketing business rather than a pure banking business where the banking activities are taken over by this big corporate bank. The whole pressure from regulators on sustainability is something that will evolve as well. And today banks are required to better estimate the impact on climate of their balance sheet. I think in the future they will also need to figure out how they can integrate their customers' impact on climate, etc. as well. There's a big discussion going on in Netherlands today about Rabobank. Rabobank, a proclaimed bank that builds on sustainability, but the fact that they have so many farmers on their balance sheet is a huge challenge. Yeah. So that's another kind of tension that we'll see in the future. And in terms of technology, I think we still have a long way to go, and that will probably evolve because with every new technology that is being implemented, we see new opportunities. Technology will be used increasingly more to enhance the human contact between banks and people, I think. And more mundane jobs will be taken over by robots, and we will see that as a given in the future. But other tasks, there you see human-to-human interaction, and maybe through a computer where this bank advisor is assisted by a big machine that interprets in real time or in real time what the customer in front of him needs, what his background is, and maybe even what his future would look like if we do provide him service X or service Y. So those are different aspects where I do see quite a lot of change. And on the other hand, maybe even a bit more flavors of Islamic banking, where you have a completely different philosophy about banking that looks more at when we spoke about risk management before. Today, banks, when they do risk assessment for a credit project, for example, they will evaluate the one that is asking for the credit, where in Islamic banking, they look more at the project that requires the credit. I think that kind of change, mentality shift, will also lead to more sustainability in the future. So I see that maybe our industry may be influenced in a way as well, and that's a more cultural shift, of course. And probably I forgot a few things, but these are maybe the essential shifts that I see for the near future.
Yeah. Very fascinating. It shows that banking isn't like what people think is a boring or like non-changing, but actually it continuously evolves together with society and the expectations of the rest of society.
Yeah.
We're almost at the end, Rik, but do you have something else that you want to talk about or that we haven't discussed yet?
Not at this stage. If you're having discussion on AI, happy to contribute in the discussion. I'm not an AI expert, but I am very intrigued in what opportunities and value AI can bring in banking. But aside from that, I don't think I have anything to add.
Yeah. Maybe before we close, can you tell the listeners where they can find you on social media, or also if they are interested in following the banking scene, where they can find you?
Well, the banking scene has a very nice website, www.thebанkingscene.com. And myself, I'm very available, very visible on social media, on LinkedIn. And my name is Rik Coeckelbergs. Coeckelbergs, for the people that would look for me on social media. Not the most convenient name, but probably pretty unique. So once you type it, I'm the only one you'll find.
Yeah, we'll also put a link to your LinkedIn and Twitter profiles on the description of the show, so people can find you. So thanks, Rik, very much for this very interesting discussion.
Thank you for having me.
And I also look forward to meeting you finally in person at the Art Night in Brussels. So
excellent.
That's something that we can look forward to.
I see you in 2 weeks then.
Yeah, okay. Thanks so much, Rik.
All right, bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Thanks for listening to the FinRestra podcast.